Lunenten here, and I think I made it pretty clear Mega Man Zero is an enormous guilty pleasure for me. That is, until I replayed it, and my opinion of it steeped even lower. How is it possible for a game to gradually disappoint me this much? As I said before, the groundwork is great, but the grinding, and the visibility, and don't even get me started. The only way the formula could truly strive is if they developed a sequel that fixed those drawbacks and really shined. I'm really thankful that happened. Mega Man Zero 2 is unsurprisingly the direct sequel to Mega Man Zero. Capcom requested Inti Creates to continue the series after how successful the first game was. They planned for 2 more sequels, with Zero 2 releasing soon after. Funnily enough, it came out in North America the same day as Mega Man X7, and unlike X7, which was planned for being X7, Zero 2 was received just as well as the first game among reviewers. They appreciated all the improvements to the formula, even if they still hated its difficulty. Plus, most fans agree that Zero 2 is one of the better games in the saga for being such a massive upgrade. So, how was my experience with Zero 2? Well, I started it right after finishing the first game in the Zero ZX Legacy Collection. The opening alone blew my mind to the point I could ramble about it at least 5 other times in this review, but aside from that, Zero 2 became my favorite in the series. And by while I mean less than a day because I played Zero 3 right after. Of course, that was my first playthrough. Now I finished it plenty of times and memorized it through and through. So, do I still consider it one of the best Zero games? Or is it weaker than I remember it? Or did critics make a mistake when they thought X7 was worse? The entire world would probably go into chaos before anyone agrees with that statement. But I'm still going to talk about Zero 2 for another half hour. Just as a disclaimer, my story summaries from now on won't go nearly as in-depth. I realized before I was pretty much only explaining what they were when I'd rather go over what makes them so great. Or possibly bad. On the bright side, Zero 2 falls into the former. The story begins with this opening dialogue crawl about the events of the past year. It helps set up why Zero is randomly trudging through a sandstorm. Also, can I just say that this opening, this is the greatest first impression I've ever gotten from a video game. The amount of attention to detail is insane. The menus are broken down versions of the first game. Zero is constantly limping over no matter his health. His weapons are so worn out they lost all their skills. After fighting an endless wave of Pantheon, Zero mutters, "This isn't fun anymore." The music for the monologue and boss fight are remixes of Zero 1 songs, and the main theme Departure. I'm still not done praising this opening, by the way, but I'd rather discuss the other aspects when they're more relevant. After the best introduction in history, Zero passes out and Harpuya casually swings by. But at least it establishes that the Guardians are still active, even without their leader. A cutaway transition later and we're greeted with a new Resistance base. All of the members from the last base are present, but now we have a new leader in charge known as El Piso. Presumably, he's why the Resistance has grown so much. TL, on the other hand, is busy researching a new energy source, as she believes it'll help end the crisis with Neo Arcadia. Some random soldier notices Zero unconscious outside the base, so obviously, everyone leaves to rescue him. Eventually, Zero reawakens, being fully repaired by Servo. Now that he's reunited with the Resistance, he checks in with CL, which is when she exposits everything I just went over. He also meets with El Piso for the first time. He has plans to strike Neo Arcadia since they no longer have a leader. On the other hand, Zero argues that issuing guerrilla missions would be a better idea, since it gives CL enough time to finish her research. So, El Piso requests Zero to help out with those kinds of missions, and once again, Zero accepts. One of my complaints with the last game's plot was that barely anything happened in between the beginning and end. Sure, there were some details dropped, like, hell yeah, we saved Todd and the Cyber Elf! But it wasn't anything super significant. This time around, the plot is constantly moving forward and gets more intense as it goes on. After the mission in the forest, Cyber Elf X reappears to warn Zero of the baby elves. If their mother, the Dark Elf, is reawakened, then doom is inevitable. And after the main missions are complete, El Piso launches his full frontal assault, yet still falls to the Guardians, and as retaliation, they launch a missile towards the base. After Zero stops the missile, El Piso straight up disappears. Turns out he abandoned his role as leader as he believed he wasn't powerful enough to earn the title. So now he wants to reawaken the Dark Elf to gain power and destroy Neo Arcadia and all humans for good. Unsurprisingly, this is a horrible idea, so Zero chases after Elpizo in an attempt to stop him. But even after encounters with the Guardians and Cyber Elf X stalling him in the other forest, Elpizo manages to reach the core of Neo Arcadia and plans to open the seal for the Dark Elf. Zero transports back to Neo Arcadia to prevent Elpizo's awful scheme. Along the way, he's forced to deal with bosses he's already clashed with, as it seems like they've been brainwashed to follow Elpizo blindly. The only one who struggles against following him is Harpuya, who ends up being transformed into his arm phenomenon form against his own will. He even begs for Zero to kill him if it means protecting his master, which just proves his loyalty. Zero spares his life in the end anyways, but he still requests for Zero to stop Elpizo before it's too late. Inside Yggdrasil, Zero discovers that he's too late, as Elpizo already reached the Dark Elf chamber. Suddenly, Zero gets trapped and he's forced to watch the sacrifice of his own comrade. This breaks open the seal, and Elpizo starts transforming with the power of the Dark Elf. Is anyone capable of stopping Elpizo now? Not counting Zero, who struck him down twice. Thankfully, that was enough for Elpizo to quit dueling. Lying in severe pain, Elpizo reflects on his actions and realizes the horrible mistake he made. He apologizes for everything he caused, and is even accepting of his fate, but the Dark Elf breaks through her curse and saves his life at the very last second. Unfortunately, this was false hope, as she reverts back to her dark form and flees Neo Arcadia, ending this chapter off on a cliffhanger. Or sorry, 2 cliffhangers. Can I just say that Elpizo is without a doubt my favorite character in this game? He starts out feeling a bit awkward about being promoted to leader, and after he failed became power-hungry and arrogant. Just look at all the crap he pulled off. With the power of 2 baby elves. Sure, power-obsessive villains are cliché, but Elpizo's motive justifies the cliché. Not to mention he comes to terms with his errors and accepts his laws. Aside from maybe the Bonds from Legends, he's by far my favorite Mega Man antagonist. Beyond just him, the rest of the cast has a ton of depth. Zero is still the same kick butt so he can become a Reploid like the others, and with even more dialogue. TL is still a caring leader who tries her best to help out and is even willing to risk her life. The base is filled with plenty of new faces, and their dialogue changes more to discuss new events. Let's not forget the Guardians, who receive way more screen time and a better look at their personalities. And I like how Cyber Elf X plays an essential role by explaining lore to Zero. To top it all off, the presentation improved a bunch. NPCs have extra animations rather than just standing there the entire time, and more cutscenes feature full-scale drawings. They're small additions, of course, but the story ends up feeling more dynamic thanks to them. Not to mention the translation holds up way better. I do have one complaint though, and that's how the cutscenes are unskippable. To be fair, you couldn't in 0-1, but those cutscenes didn't take up much of your time. Meanwhile, the story segments in this game often span an entire minute, maybe even longer. At the end of the day, it's a great narrative, but I wish I didn't have to sit through it every single playthrough. The story is a huge step up, but can I say the same about Audiovisuals? To sum it up briefly, heck yeah! Visually, 0-2 is identical to the first game. It still retains the same art direction and sprite work, although everything else had a massive glow up. The backgrounds for one look significantly more detailed. Just compare the desert between games. That lazy blur effect from 0-1 evolved into this beautiful sunset. There's also an incredible increase in location variety. You'll trek from Arctic tundras, to forests, to caverns, to hell, to temples, and even more. Some themes are reused between levels, but they feature different set pieces and locales to set them apart. Also, the sprite animation looks way more fluid, especially with bosses. Feast your eyes on that silky, smooth slinky. I don't even know where to begin with 0-2's music. 0-1's soundtrack was fine, but most of the songs were pretty forgettable. I understand they were going for a more atmospheric ambiance, although it doesn't change how bland some songs could be. Thankfully, 0-2 delivers tenfold in the music department. The compositions for one are constantly trying to pump you up. Who could forget Ice Brain, Platinum, Sand Triangle, Power Bomb, Combustion, Cool Hearted Fellow, Silver Wolf, or a plethora of others? Especially Departure, best intro theme ever. The instrumentation is also more refined, with larger variety and better choices overall. I'd say the Crash remix is a great example of that. The weird guitar during the melody of Crash 1 was replaced with an actual guitar in Crash 2. There are a handful I don't care much for, like the boss or title screen themes, but the strong songs overshadow the weak ones by a long shot. As the gameplay stood the test of time as well as the audio visuals and story have, similar to literally every Mega Man sequel, Zero 2 is pretty much a rehash of Zero 1. To reiterate, Mega Man Zero takes a melee-based combat of Zero's playstyle from the X series and expands upon it while simultaneously focusing heavily on speed and precision and less on platforming. However, Zero 2 polishes plenty of the first game's issues, and get this, it's actually enjoyable. The controls feel about the same as they did before. You still retain that perfect weight and responsive movement unmatched by any Mega Man game before, or sometimes the ones released simultaneously. The controls are also set up in the most ideal way possible considering the limited buttons on GBA. Only use Type B controls though, as they let you take advantage of multiple weapons at a time, which is especially important for certain techniques that I'll get into. Also because Type A and Type C are worthless. Onto the combat itself, it's fairly similar to Zero 1's. You see what I mean by Mega Man games all being the same crap? That's not to say Zero 2 didn't make some drastic changes. 3 of the weapons return virtually unaltered: the Z-Saber, Buster Shot, and Shield Boomerang. They all have multiple different functions and can earn upgrades through hidden experience from enemies. This is the first sign of improvement on Zero 2's end. In Zero 1, it took so long for weapons to fully upgrade that you were better off grinding. What I also never brought up was, since you don't have access to the Triple Rod or Shield Boomerang until much later, they most likely wouldn't get much time to shine due to how underpowered they'd be. I'm not sure what they did exactly, but leveling up is so much faster in this game that I earned all my upgrades by the halfway point. I'm still not a fan of basic attacks like the full Saber combo being locked behind this system, and I can never forgive them for removing the Kuenzan from level ups, but it's just a small example of the attention to polish. Instead of the Triple Rod, we now have the Chain Rod. You can aim it in any 8 directions, and the range is much longer. On top of that, you can latch onto enemies, penetrate through shields, grapple off of ceilings or walls, and pull objects closer. At first, it can be pretty clunky to use properly, but once you've mastered its functionality, it becomes a blessing. They even built some puzzles around the weapon into stages. Aside from that, the charge attack is pretty much the same as the Triple Rod, and best of all, you're given access to it and the Shield Boomerang immediately after the intro stage. It's a huge step up from the Triple Rod. I'd say the major new addition to combat are the EX skills. It was slightly disappointing how Zero wasn't able to learn techniques from bosses in the last game, so seeing a variation of them back is great. That doesn't mean elemental chips were removed though. In fact, you can combine them with certain EX skills. The Buster techniques need their respective chip attached to work at all, but the Z-Saber skills can be used regardless and are enhanced with them. There are 10 you can acquire in total, 4 each for the Saber and Buster, while the Shield and Rod only have 1. For the Buster skills, they range from piercing through shields to shooting out icicles to an explosion to ripping off Mega Man 7. The Saber techniques involve a rising slash, downward spike, dashing thrust, and a short-range shockwave. They're noticeably based off X-Force techniques, which is especially apparent with their elements applied. The last two don't have any offensive utility, but they are useful for collecting E-crystals or life energy. To coincide with the EX skills, another new feature are the forms, which are kinda sorta similar to armors. If you complete missions under specific circumstances, you unlock a new form that grants special advantages others don't have. There are 7 you can unlock in the main story, but I won't describe them much since we'd be here for ages. The only one I really cared about was the active form, which on top of doubling your speed allows Zero to pull off the Kuenzan again. You've been redeemed, game. A couple of the others have effects such as buffing the Buster Shot, erasing enemy shots with a Saber Swing, or altering the Triple Slash combo in some way. But who cares? Give me Kuenzan or give me death. As if what I mentioned wasn't enough, the tech game has also seen improvements. The broken exploits in Zero 1 are nowhere to be seen, and I don't miss them because they trivialize the hell out of bosses. You still have your reversal and skull crushes intact, although it's not like they broke the game in half. The biggest change would be a combo system of sorts. This wouldn't be fleshed out until the later games, but for Zero 2, you can follow up specific attacks with the Triple Slash combo. There are also some nuances here and there, like replacing the Saber combo with the Charge Rod or canceling slashes with the Shockwave. Again, I'm no expert. I'd watch someone like Magnus Zero if you want more in-depth explanations. That being said, the new additions to combat raise the bar in so many ways Zero One couldn't even dream of reaching. But no matter how great the combat feels, level design is still way more important for a platformer. The stages in the last game were honestly unremarkable for the most part. They were obviously focused way more on fighting enemies and speedrunning. This is yet another area where Zero Two succeeds. The levels in this game still emphasize those aspects of course, but there are way more segments of platforming. This is demonstrated perfectly in the intro stage I won't shut up about. You've got plenty of pits to jump over, platforms that crumble and drop when stood on, and some hidden items you need to slide down walls to reach. And it's not just the opening level, which I could probably write an entire essay about as a great stage, there are plenty of others to praise. Although first I should probably mention how the structure of Zero Two is more akin to past Mega Man games, specifically 7 and 8. You start out with 4 main levels after the intro, 2 first mid stages afterwards, then 4 new main levels open up, and finally the Neo Arcadia stages to conclude things off. One minor improvement I really appreciate is that the mission select now tells you which boss you'll be facing as well as giving a more detailed description of your objective. The only real downside to the new structure I can think of is that the stages aren't integrated into an overworld like Zero One. To be fair though, it might have been difficult to seamlessly connect them with how drastically different the settings are for each level, and if having the stages bridged together means sacrificing location variety, then I'd rather take the former. I feel like they compensated for the exclusion really well anyways. You can spot certain parts of other stages in specific levels, like how you start in the power room during the shuttle factory mission, but more importantly, you're now allowed to revisit any level you want after completing them and collect any items you missed the first time around. The stages still feature the mission objectives like before, but at first glance there's not a whole lot of variety. Rather than disarming bombs or demolishing a giant mechanoid, you destroy 4 objects. And you destroy 4 objects. And you destroy 4 plus 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 4 objects. However, they were emphasizing the design of the levels way more, so these missions are treated more like bonuses to complete along the way than fully focused objectives. With the advantage of a wider assortment of locations, enemies have also seen more variety this time around. You'll still notice mostly Pantheon soldiers reused between stages, along with a couple new forms like hoppers, hammers, and cannons. But aside from the Neo Arcadia stages, almost every level features their own set of enemies built around their theme, and you often won't find them in any other stage. The ice levels include snow wolves, ice pushers, and snowball rollers. Meanwhile, the forests are home to bees, moles, and caterpillars. Anyways, how about I finally go over the stages themselves? The main missions start out really solid in the first half. The train of Neo Arcadia is like a fleshed out version of the Destroy Train mission from the last game, and there's a new obstacle present with the electric gates you need to avoid. The Forest of Theses is a really enjoyable one with trees you can burn to uncover items and puzzles built around the chain rod. The power room is interesting with all its branching paths and secret rooms to explore. And the computer zone is one you'd assume would suck because of the ice physics, but using the momentum to pass platforming segments is surprisingly fun. Unfortunately, the second half is a bit weaker if you ask me. Shuttle Factory splits off from Power Room and does offer some tricky platforming segments over lava, but then the roof of the computer factory just spams a ton of bombs all over the ground and it's nothing to write home about otherwise. Forest of Notice is pretty good, but it's not much more than a harder rehash of the last Forest stage. And I wanna love the Crystal Cave because it's probably the most creative level, but the visibility gives me an aneurysm. If you thought those were a decline in quality, well, you're right. But they don't steep nearly as low as the mid stages. Residential area is just bland. I suppose it's still enjoyable because of the combat and controls, but there is absolutely nothing to say about it. And then the aircraft, screw the aircraft. The best way to describe it is to imagine Wind Crowing from X7 if it were a good level, but it ends up being garbage anyways. The Neo Arcadia levels are decent, but honestly, I'll take the first games over these any day. I have nothing to say about Neo Arcadia Temple. It's another straightforward, uninteresting level, and I don't like how Temple of Fire forces you to aim bombs while you're sliding down a wall hanging over lava. But Temple of Ice is like Computer Zone, and Temple of Wind uses the one good gimmick from the aircraft. The final stage is the boss rush again, and thankfully it follows Zero One's mentality of splitting the battles and giving you an actual stage to work with. And by stage, I mean spikes littered in the worst places possible. The best way to summarize Zero Two's level design is that it contains a lot of high highs, but also some pretty low lows, at least for the Zero games. In all fairness, I was brief with my descriptions, and some missions have way more going for them than I explained. Despite its inconsistency, it's still a satisfying stage selection and substantially superior to Zero One's straight shots. Why did I just alliterate that? To enhance the already usually great level design even more, Cyber Elves make a comeback. At their core, Cyber Elves haven't changed much at all. They're collectibles you find hidden in levels through boxes, destroying enemies, scouring the base, or defeating a mini-boss. I still consider them a great form of collectible since they entice you to discover the levels to their fullest, and for the most part they're placed appropriately so you don't need to waste too much time looking for them. There are a couple exceptions here and there, most notably in Power Room, although being allowed to revisit levels at any time alleviates this problem. There's a handful of minor adjustments to the Cyber Elves themselves. You've got some useful new forms for one, such as boosting your rank or giving you 2 more continues. Wait, how have I not mentioned that yet? They altered the retries into a more traditional life system. That alone proves this is a better game. Oh, and speaking of fixing 01's fatal flaws, Cyber Elves also demand way less sea crystals to fully upgrade. You'll still need to grind in order to feed them all, but rather than the nearly 30,000 that were required last time, you can get away with a fifth of that amount here. The last thing I figured I'd mention are sub-tanks. In the last game, you could obtain 4 if you activated the respective Cyber Elves, but using them was discouraged since they negate your ranking. They still affect your score in this game, of course, except now there are only 2 elves that transform into sub-tanks. The other 2 can be located in the forest stages, meaning you no longer need to sacrifice your elves and ruin your ranking for some extra health in a pinch. As if the game wasn't already on a roll of constant glow-ups, even the bosses are superior in 01. Nothing wrong with most of the fights from that game, 02 just knocks it out of the park with its boss design. It's an even more consistent selection, with every single boss being a blast to take down. A lot of people point at Phoenix Magnion, but honestly, as long as you're using Type B controls, I wouldn't consider him that unfair of a fight. Even with their weaknesses involved, I still find a majority of these bosses genuinely challenging. It's easy to see how much tougher the bosses have become from Harpuya's fight. Everyone knows how pathetic he was in the original due to always resetting his pattern from his weakness, but this time around he can actually counter when he's knocked down. It's tough for me to choose a favorite boss battle, but Panther Flawclaws is definitely up there. He trounces around quickly and shoots electricity at you while the both of you are standing on top of moving trains, so trying to dodge his attacks can be tricky. Or you can just cling onto the gap in between and whittle him away. Until he uses his special skill and sends an electric current through the entire train. That's right, the special skills for bosses are back. These are only active depending on your rank, but it helps toughen up the easier bosses like Polar Kramos. Although, I will criticize something about the boss fights, and that's the difficulty balancing. Within your first 4 picks for missions, you're given 2 fairly manageable bosses with Hyla Gorobakla and Polar Kramos, yet simultaneously these frantic bastards move ridiculously fast and dish out super tough attacks. It happens like this for the rest of the game as well, and even the El Piso fight suffers from this a bit. The first phase has super quick movements and punishing attacks, then the second phase just floats there slowly. It's not copy-X pathetic at least, but it really showcases the weird balancing of these bosses. Ignoring that, I still find them really fun to clash with. I think it's about time I tackle the ranking system again. I went on an entire tangent before, so I'll try to summarize my points from there. In a nutshell, I love the concept of the ranking system since these games are about precision, but they botched it hard. There are stupid factors like killing a specific amount of enemies per stage, or lives being important, or Cyber Elves leaving a permanent scar, but the icing on the cake was how it determined your final rank by your average score instead of your individual score in each stage. So, has 02 tweaked any of the underlying flaws? Pfft. Okay, to be fair, they did lighten the damage requirement so you lose a point roughly every 5 points of damage taken instead of 3. Also, your codename is comprised of 2 parts now, which is nice. Neither of those mitigate the core problems of the ranking system though. Enemy count, lives, and Cyber Elves still shouldn't be factors for your rank. Heck, in some missions you'll need to farm enemy kills so you can earn all 15 points. One aspect I conveniently forgot to mention were the letter scores. If your average net's at least 86 points, you'll sit at A rank, and even higher at 96 points or more is S rank. Everything below ranges from B to F, but they don't matter. I will admit that once you're aware of the stage's layout, achieving A ranks isn't a huge deal, but S ranks are absolute hell. The reason why I bring this up now is because for whatever reason, they tied unlocking EX skills to rankings. If you hold an A or S rank while fighting a boss, you'll be rewarded with the technique. To the game's credit, there are Cyber Elves which temporarily boost your rank to A, and you can pass the game without EX skills perfectly fine. I just don't agree with them being restricted to a crappy system they hardly fixed. It's not just the skills that are stupid to unlock either, the same can be said about the forms. Similar to last time, Servo gives you a vague-ass hint of unlocking them, so I had to scour the internet so I could earn them all. That's definitely a good sign. The methods to unlocking these usually force you to grind, and only during a mission. Like, why would you waste precious time pulling a block 30 times in a row? Worst case scenario being the X form, which forces you to destroy 50 enemies using only the Buster Shot, because it's not like the enemy counts for levels are normally half that number. Learning forms just feels completely counterintuitive to rankings. This might seem out of left field, but it's finally time for me to explain why I hate the aircraft mission so much. I think it perfectly resembles Zero 2's fundamental problems. The first section forces you to make leaps of faith across flying ships. Meanwhile, bolts are shooting at you, and you can easily get surprise motherfuckered into a bottomless pit. The second segment has an interesting gimmick with these lethal beams, although reaction time, you're joking, right? And then it all plummets into an abyss with the main portion. Ciel attempts hacking into the computer. Meanwhile, you need to defend her from a bullet hell combined with Pantheon hoppers crawling everywhere, and it drags on for an entire minute and a half. Yet somehow, even after all that, you still won't have enough enemy kills. Screw this mission. I'm gonna be honest, this is not only my least favorite mission in Zero 2, but my most hated mission in the entire Zero saga. I don't dislike it because I suck at it. I can pass within a rank just fine now. It's just from the poor visibility to the ranking requirements to how much of an extreme difficulty spike it is, I feel like it houses the major issues of this game all at once. Beyond the main game, what about bonus content? After finishing for the first time, you'll be greeted with both the New Game Plus option and Hard Mode. Both of these are pretty similar to how they were before. New Game Plus retains all your Cyber Elves, and in this game all the forms and EX skills you collected. Hard Mode, on the other hand, is artificial difficulty. No redesigned levels, no new boss patterns, just limiting your attacks to the bare minimum. This time around you're stuck in the Proto form, which cuts your defense in half while simultaneously doubling your attack. If you manage to complete a hard mode file, you unlock an image gallery containing all the cutscene artwork, which is a sweet bonus, I guess. Ultimate mode technically makes a comeback, but it's handled terribly. It's the same method as last time. You activate all your Cyber Elves, which is reasonable to achieve this time around, although instead of an entire mode, it's relegated to a form. It includes the same benefits as last time, instant charge attacks and buff stats all around, but it doesn't account for the Cyber Elves you lost, so the game still penalizes your rank. Feels like a weird oversight to me. Most importantly though are multiplayer minigames. If you own 2 copies of Zero 2, you can play against another friend in 3 different games. A time attack where you race against one another, an enemy gauntlet, and collecting as many Z panels as possible. What's also cool is that you can use any of the skills or forms you unlocked in single player. It's unfortunately kind of a pain to play these since you need 2 copies of Zero 2 and 2 GBAs and a link cable, and they were removed in the collections for obvious reasons. If you just so happen to own all this crap or have other methods, then I think they're worth trying out at least once. Honestly, what more really is there to say about Mega Man Zero 2? It's what the Zero formula needed to truly shine by polishing all of Zero 1's fundamental flaws and expanding upon it in almost every way imaginable. You know, like good sequels tend to do. The story follows up super well and boasts better presentation, the audio visuals went from decent enough to outstanding, the combat has more depth, the level design is actual level design, the bosses are tougher, not to mention the plethora of quality of life improvements. Oh, and also the opening is pristine and the greatest thing ever. It was tough for me to criticize much about Zero 2 because I think it's really well made. A majority of my complaints were minor in the grand scheme of things, like how unlocking skills or forms were handled. Although, visibility and rankings are still core issues, some annoying mechanics were just alleviated instead of fixed altogether, the difficulty spikes out of nowhere a lot, plus the unskippable cutscenes and inconsistent level selection turned me off from revisiting this game often. None of those detract from my love for Zero 2 though, and it would easily rank up there as one of my favorite Mega Man games. And this isn't even my favorite of the saga. If anything, I would highly recommend beginning with Zero 2 instead of Zero 1. As I said before, it's easy to pick up on the story from here, and all the refined mechanics make it a much smoother experience. It doesn't really matter which version you pick up, the original does have multiplayer minigames and didn't use a watch battery for saving. Although, the most affordable and accessible option will always be the Mega Man Zero ZX Legacy Collection. There's also a remix of Departure, so it's objectively the best way to play. But anyways, until next time, this is Blue Ninten, and if I had this much positive to say about Zero 2, then I can't even imagine how much I can gush over the next 2 games.